My name is IRIVUZUMUGABE. My last name is so hard to pronounce for the Western people. But it is so hard for me also sometimes to pronounce some of your names. IRIVUZUMUGABE means word of the king. And then I think when my father was giving me this name, he was inspired about what my name was going to do in the world today.
Your family killed, and it was your family that was slaughtered, and it was you running for your life. It's going to make more than just a blip. Today we're having a special guest, IRIVUZUMUGABE. Eric is from Rwanda, and he's come to share his story.
It's really a privilege for me to be able to introduce Eric. My wife and Colleen, while they were over there, Cheryl called in the middle of her trip and she goes, "Larry, I've met this man. He's just amazing." She says, we need to get him out to California to talk because he's got such an inspirational story. And I'm like, yeah, I've heard a lot of those kind of things, right? But Eric came out and has been living with us for the last week, and I believe now that God has really anointed him in really a special way to carry a message. I arranged as one of his speaking things this week to go out to Central High School, which is our continuation school in town. 150 students, they're having a very difficult time making it through school. And I asked the principal ahead of time if we could bring books out to sell, and she goes, "No, none of these kids can afford books, so don't bring any books." And I said, okay, so we came out there and we brought some books anyway. Eric spoke, and the kids mobbed him. They just loved him. And he sold 20 books there. And the principal came up afterwards and said, "Can I buy more books? Because I want to give these out to all of my kids if I can. They need to hear this story," because it was such an inspirational thing. So I know today that you're going to be blessed too, and I'm just really proud to be able to call Eric now my friend. Eric IRIVUZUMUGABE.
Morning. My name is IRIVUZUMUGABE. I was inspired with the songs about broken heart, and then how when we broken our heart, who we need to give our heart, which is God. I am here to share my story with you about forgiveness, restoration, and hope, which became a Rwandan experience after the 1994 genocide, because we are living with hope, forgiveness, and restoration. And our experience today is restoration, which is why I am here for restoring the American people. I know people, they are broken heart because of different reasons, but the Rwandans was broken heart because of the genocide. As your pastor told you, the 1994 genocide was not the first genocide in my country. The first genocide happened during the 1959, and then the second genocide happened during the 1972, and then the last genocide was during the 1994. I was 16 years old during the genocide in 1994, and then I survived the genocide by climbing the cypress tree, where I spent 15 days without food or water with my 3 uncles. I used to tell the story about my uncle was older than others. He had 5 children and a wife, and then when we were in the tree, all of them there were killed, and he became alone in his family because he survived alone, and then he became broken in heart and traumatized about for losing his family. Our country is a so beautiful country. When you get in my country, you can learn about different things after the 94, because we are living with hope, development, and the different changes. I don't like how the media used to use the negative pictures about the Africa, because there is some positive pictures also. When you get in my country, you can see how our country is very clean, with very high hospitality, and then some tourism sites like the parks. We have some beautiful things. But for myself, I survived the genocide by climbing the cypress tree, as I told in the beginning, because In the beginning, when the genocide began, I tried to fled and run on the hillside for the militia. And then at the end, I hid in the cypress tree where I spent 15 days without food or water and with my 3 uncles. And then I would like them to play this video.
In my country, the cypress is known as the tree of life. I never dreamed it would save me from bloodthirsty men. Through 100 days of hell that raged through Rwanda, 3 uncles and I hid in cypress trees, listening to the roar of violence. Days felt like years, while our suffering families' screams led us all toward madness. My name is Eric, and I am a genocide survivor. Still, 70 members of my Tutsi family were murdered, along with 1 million others killed at a rate faster than any war in history. But genocide is only part of my story. During those nights of terror, I could find no trace of a loving God, but God helped us escape. We have witnessed murder, rape, humiliation, beatings, and hate. We have also experienced greater love, and today I believe in God, the maker of the trees. To forgive those who murdered your family is an overwhelming request. But forgiveness is one of the greatest gifts a victim can offer. We tell our stories to bring healing, to offer hope to our orphans, and to mend wounded hearts outside our borders. I'm alive to tell you that God is real, and He saved my life.
Thank you. I would like to share my story with you about my faith, my mission in the world after the genocide with my story, and how I became a born again. One time, 4 years later after the 94 genocide, I was walking in the street, and then I heard the voice for the singers, which was the small group was singing in the small group of church in my home village. And then I went to that church, and then when I went to that church, I was sitting like on the backside with and watching the singers and the church leaders and the old people was sitting there. There was around 250 people. And then when the singers was singing, like this worship leaders was on the front of you, I was looking at them like the fresh people, because when they was singing, I was judging them because of what happened in the genocide through the churches and through what the church leaders was doing, like some killers. That's the church leaders who became the leaders, who became the killers, and some they became victims, like being killed. And then when I saw that group of people was singing, I was feel like they couldn't sing like how they was singing when they was in Rwanda doing the genocide, because they were the ones who left their country doing the first and second genocide. And then they are the ones who bring the revival in Rwanda after the genocide also, when people there was hopeless and they losing trust in for churches. And then one time when when I became a born again, I had a struggle with my life to following God again, because I was asking many questions if God is really exists. And then I was sharing with you about it. But when I became a born again, after a few years later, God was showing me this dry bones, and God showed me that many hearts of Rwandans, like genocide survivors, orphans and widows, their heart was dry like these bodies. And then God showed me how I was going to be part of bringing hope and build peace among of the Rwandans. Power of forgiveness. After I became a born again, I had a struggle for how to forgive my enemies. One time after I became a born again, as I told you that I became a born again just 4 years later after the genocide, this group of church, when they was praying, when I went there, they was praying for the orphans and the widows for hope to them. And then I became interested because I was one of the hopeless people. And then after I became a born again, God spoke to me to forgive my enemies. And then when he spoke to me to forgive my enemies, I became struggling to forgive my enemies because I didn't know who I was going to forgive, because I didn't saw anyone who killed my relatives. And then I tried to ask myself how I can forgive, who I can forgive. I don't know who I can forgive. And then God spoke to me that, Eric, forgive even if it doesn't make sense. And then I started to struggle to forgive. And then when I was struggling to forgive, I decided to plan my fasting and praying, like my private prayers for the whole week. And then when I went to the prayer, I started to praying, and then for the whole week. On the third day of doing prayers, it was 3 p.m. I went to the bed and for taking rest, like taking a nap, and then I opened the radio. On the radio, there was the songs for crying, which was helping people for doing the commemoration period. And then after the song, I heard the testimony of somebody who was sharing the testimony for how he survived the genocide. And then I became emotional, and then started crying, and then my eyes started made tears. And then when I was crying, I heard a voice say that, Eric, this is your last crying as an orphan. This is your last tears. You will never cry again as an orphan. And then I was shocked by the voice, because it was like the strong rain. And then I tried to look around who spoke to me, and then I didn't find anyone. But was God spoke to me. When I went to the prayers, I went there with 4 questions, which I was going to ask God before I following him after I became a born again. Because when I became, how I became a born again, when I was in this group of church, they had 40 days of praying and fasting. And then the reason why they was praying for the orphans and widows, because there was the orphans and widows became burden to any church and after the genocide. And then when I was there, the pastor, when he was preaching on the first day, as I told you, that I was judging him and comparing him with the church leaders of before genocide. And then on the first day, I was just watching them as the foolish people. This following day, I decided to stop to go to the church. And the following day, third day, I had dreams when I was sleeping, where God spoke to me that, Eric, you need to go back to this church, because it is where your heart will be healed. Your life will be changed through to this church. And it happened. And then I decided to go back to the church. And then when the pastor was stand up and preaching, when he was preaching, I was feel like he was preaching about me, because he was talking about the hopeless person. And then I was asking myself if there was anyone who told him about me. And then when I saw around, there was no anyone. And then when he said at the end that, is it anyone who want to receive Jesus? I was the first one. And then I was crying when he was praying for me. And then after he prayed for me, I went back to my seat, and then the following day I decided to stop to continue to go to the church again, because I was struggling to be involved in the church. And then that is why I decided to pray for asking God 4 questions. Do you want to hear those questions? The first question was to asking God if he really exists. The second question was to ask God if he really exists, why the genocide happened. The third question was to ask God if he really exists, if he can tell me about what was going to be my future. And then the fourth question was to ask God what he thinks about the orphans and widows in my country, as we had many orphans and widows in my country after the genocide. But God answered every question I was asking on that evening, on the third day, doing praying. God told me that, Eric, do you know what? I am already exist before genocide, during the genocide, and after the genocide. And the problem is how people do what they decided to do. When people choose to do things, they do it. And then that is why genocide happens. I was spoke to many people to stop their ideas for genocide and to be involved in the genocide, but they couldn't hearing for me. And then that is why the genocide happened. And God spoke to me that, Eric, even you, if you don't forgive your enemies, you will not be listening to me, and there will not be the difference between you and your enemies. You have to listen to me.